Okay, today's word is vulnerable, another very useful advanced adjective. You'll be using it with to, so learn it like that, vulnerable to. It has this dependent preposition. Right, what does it mean? Basically, it means unprotected. Something is vulnerable, something is unprotected from something else. So, where will we use it? Be on the lookout for three specific areas. We often talk about vulnerable communities. Children are often vulnerable to certain things, and species are often vulnerable, for example, vulnerable to extinction. So, community, children, and species, if you have essays dealing with those things, see if you can incorporate the word vulnerable. It's a very nice word. Let's look at some examples. So, climate change, we will use vulnerable either with species or with communities, I would say. Some people say that instead of preventing climate change, we need to find a way to live with it. Quite a difficult essay topic, actually. So in this essay, you need to have a paragraph about how we must live with it, and then after a paragraph about how it's not a good idea. But in the paragraph about how to live with climate change, I could use vulnerable for communities. Many communities are particularly vulnerable to rising sea levels, coastal communities, and they would need to be relocated. So we're using adjective after the verb to be, and I've added in an adverb over here, so it's that adverb adjective structure which is I like so much, particularly vulnerable. Great. Another one. A lot of research has shown that overeating can have negative effects. This is about the advertising of certain foods should be banned in the same way that cigarettes are. So usually you want to talk about advertising toward children as one of your examples in an essay like this, and then you can use vulnerable. Children in particular are vulnerable to the influences of advertising. Vulnerable to the influences of advertising. And they are targeted by advertisers. If you get this kind of essay question, a good example is the McDonald's gives a free toy. That's advertising or marketing targeted directly at children. So, vulnerable to the influences of advertising. Vulnerable to. In many countries, traditional customs are being lost. Why do you think this is? So, this is not that common to use vulnerable for customs, but here they say something about they are in danger, they are going extinct. A custom can also go extinct, not only a species. So I'll use vulnerable to extinction, which is a nice phrase. One reason why traditional customs are vulnerable to extinction. So there, the word vulnerable was actually useful for the paraphrase, where one of the paraphrases are being lost. Vulnerable to extinction. Great. A couple of nice paraphrases that you can use. We often talk about endangered species in our climate topic. You can instead say species which are vulnerable to extinction. This is a great collocation, vulnerable to extinction. Poor communities, you could instead say economically vulnerable communities. Very nice, because then we've got this adverb adjective structure. Economically vulnerable communities is a very nice phrase. So instead of saying those two, you could paraphrase quite nicely using the word vulnerable. Great, I hope you use it, and I'll see you tomorrow.